Starting off, so I looked at success quotes before I came. One of the quotes I found was, "A goal without steps is just a wish." So the first thing I want to talk through is the fundamental question that if I've worked with you before, so again, my name is David Gay. I'm a success manager here at aPriori, so I've worked with a lot of you through your implementations, and I'm currently working with some of you in your implementations. The first question I ask is, what is your goals? Now, it's a fundamental question because if we don't understand your goals, we can't make you successful. And if you didn't guess, I'll be talking about success today, based on my title. Let me just use an example. So if you look through at the slide, what are your goals? I have behind it, and I'll point to both, I have cylinders. Now, if I look at those cylinders, they're laid out on a field next to, it looks like a small town. And there's two different examples that I could see as a goal for these cylinders. Number one, the cylinders may be used for, if you're a farm ag and you have a bunch of grain to put in the cylinders, that could be one use. That could be your goal for the cylinders. Now, the second could be if you're an oil and gas company, which I'm guessing it's most likely for oil and gas, low pressurized cylinders for the oil and gas company. Two distinct different goals, and depending on those goals, we're going to define how we're going to build those cylinders differently. So we're going to use that analogy throughout this presentation is, what is your blueprint? What goals do you have, and how would you build those cylinders? How would you build the goals in your deployment together to make sure you're successful? So we asked you a few questions coming into the event last night. The first question we asked you, do you have any specific business goals that are tied to the aPriori deployment? Now, 81% of you said yes, you have definitive business goals that are tied to your deployment. 19% of you said no. Now, we asked that question because we think that's the key driver to understanding how to make you successful. Those who said no, the 19%, I'd like you to reach out to myself or the success team afterwards. We want to understand, based on this presentation and how do we make you successful, why there is no business goal tied to our deployment, and how do we help you get there. You'll understand throughout the presentation and through some of the details we're going to go in why this is important and why this is a driving factor towards, just like that last picture, understanding if you're building a cylinder, what goal did you have? Because I'm going to build you a totally different cylinder if you don't tell me the reason why you're building it. Now, the second question that we asked, what problems are the aPriori solution helping you solve? Now, there's a list of problems that, based on my experience, Chris's experience, and the rest of the team, we put in front of you to understand what goals are we trying to help you solve, or what problems are we trying to help you solve. Now, the reason we did that, we have solutions that actually go through and will fill out understanding how we're going to solve those problems through the solutions we have. You're going to see that throughout the week. Now, if I look through the results, 21% of you said that it was around supplier collaboration. 20% of you said around design and hitting target costs. And I expected that. If we look through, and Rick actually sent this over some information about who's coming to the conference, and majority were around design and sourcing, two use cases we see every single day. Now, the others responded in different fashions. Now, some of you put other, and I'd like you to reach out to, again, myself or Chris or the rest of the CSM team, because we'd like to understand what's the other solution. I think one of you actually put, I'm working on understanding how aPriori is helping me with capacity planning. We have some solutions there as well, but if there's anything that's missing here, or we're not going to talk through this week, reach out to us, because A, we may have a solution already defined that we may not talk about, or B, we may have to work with you to understand how do we drive a solution that's going to help you solve your goal. So again, starting with your goal, we're going to drive to making sure the solutions we have is going to help you be successful. So next, I'm going to pass off to Chris, and he's going to talk through a little more detail around this topic.
Thanks, David. So David has pointed out knowing your goals and the problem you're going to try to solve is critical to having your success achieved. Aligning those goals, along with the measurable requirements, will lead to the right plan and eventually get you to that end journey. Without these, your success is going to be marginal. In fact, we know 40% of projects fail when business goals are not aligned with requirements. Should have kept my glasses on. I can't even read the remote. Whatever large endeavors you undertake, you're always going to start with a plan. That plan will define what that success is going to look like. If you're to create a new building, for instance, whether it be a factory or let's say a storage facility, as we've used in the example with David, you're going to start with a couple of key elements. You're going to start with a site, a foundation, a building structure. These are fundamental to the outcome of a blueprint. So imagine trying to add an addition to your house. Has anybody ever added an addition on a house or built a house from scratch? I think Kevin asked a similar question this morning. I've done it about 15 years ago. I'll never do it again. But trying to go to the town planning board and getting that permit to build without a blueprint's impossible. Trying to get a general contractor to quote on what that thing will cost is impossible. You need that blueprint to start. Without that, your success is going to be marginal at best. So here at aPriori, we look at something called the customer success plan as the first part of our engagement with you. It helps us align your outcomes and goals with our success plan to achieve that ultimate deployment success. Together, we jointly plan this. And when I say we, I mean aPriori, our customer success managers, some of whom you know, and the rest you'll meet a little bit later today, as well as you and your management team. Together, we outline what those elements of success are going to be. Ultimately, it's about value, achieving the value of your solution. And at aPriori, we think about value in really 4 phases or 4 stages. First is quantifiable. Do we have the right fit for your needs? Is the solution the right fit for your particular outcome? Second is first value. Have your users been able to achieve that basic beginning, that optimization of your business process to get to that end goal? Next, expanded value. Expanded value is really about taking that original deployment, that first value, and extending it to the rest of the organization as defined in your success plan. And finally, sustained value. Have you actually achieved the outcomes that you were expecting when you originally signed up with aPriori? Are those business practices improved? Are you achieving those outcomes? And as I mentioned before, the person responsible for doing this with you is your customer success manager. People like David. They are the people that are your advocates, your guides, your partners in building this plan and then executing that plan. So the first element in any building plan is site selection, right? You got to decide where you're going to build it. That site selection is going to dictate what kind of building you can have. If you're building an oil storage facility, as we mentioned before, well, you're probably going to locate it near, well, first of all, it's going to be on flat land. You're probably not going to build it on the side of a mountain. It's probably going to be near roadways, waterways, major transportation hubs so that you can get that oil delivered. Much like you would build a power plant near a water source for cooling, or you'd build a hotel near a population center. Your company goals are analogous to the site selection. They'll guide the type of deployment that we're going to put in place, the type of solution that you're going to get. So, for instance, are you trying to achieve cost savings? Are you trying to improve manufacturability? Are you trying to get to market faster with improved NPI? These are all key elements of a well-defined customer goal and will form the basis for how we're going to deploy the solution. The next element of a good blueprint is the foundation. The foundation sets the scope, the scale of the building that you're going to create. Much like your company goals establish the foundation, much like the deployment objectives will set the foundation for your project. It sets the footprint. Now, there are good foundations and bad foundations based upon the site selection. Just like there are good and bad deployment goals, effective and ineffective deployment goals. A shallow slab foundation is probably going to be pretty good for a factory, especially something holding paper goods. But you probably wouldn't use a slab foundation for a skyscraper. It's not the right fit. It's not the right scope and scale for what you're trying to achieve. It's tying those deployment objectives back to your business goals. So without deployment objectives tied to your company goals, you're likely going to have a cracked foundation. It's not going to be something you can build on effectively. I was talking to David beforehand, and he reminded me of a story that I thought I might tell here. Prior to working at aPriori, I was working at a large software company, and we were helping a large aerospace company with PLM deployment. Ultimately, that PLM deployment was successful. It took a number of years. We had identified that the goal was to improve change management. It was to improve engineering release processes so that there'd be less ECOs. And ultimately, we thought that we were successful. But towards the end of the project, when we started to wonder why it had taken so many years to get this done, we had a conversation with the CEO, and he told us, well, ultimately, it was about reducing the engineering cost. So putting future bid rates into my government contract that were lower than what I had previously. So while we had what we thought was a successful deployment, and in some measures was, it actually could have been much faster and much better aligned if we had known what that original goal was. We would have done things completely differently. We would have gone after the engineering community a little bit differently. We'd have gone after some of the process change differently. So it's really important that you know what those goals are so that you can set up your deployment objectives properly. Strong deployment goals fit the scope and scale of the company goals. They provide tangible and specific measures that will help you achieve those goals. And for product development, they might be something like enabling DTC in the early design process. If you're looking at sourcing, they're likely going to be tied to sourcing objectives, supplier objectives. And whatever the case, they form a strong foundation for the next part of your plan. Quantifiable outcomes. When David and I put this together, I thought quantifiable outcomes, how am I going to describe this? It's probably the easiest way to think of it is it's your values, your measures. How are you going to measure your solution? It's the structure of your plan. It conforms the solution. So a shell structure, for instance, as we talked about with this oil storage facility, it's really about holding liquids so that they don't spill and evaporate. Makes sense, right? A frame structure probably wouldn't work too well, right? You'd have spillage and leakage all over the place. Your quantifiable outcomes do conform with your company goals. If your structure's wrong, much like this kind of neat house, it's going to be completely useless at the end. It's funny, when I saw Stephanie's slides up there this morning, I said, oh, we have the same slide. Planned that way. But the quantifiable outcomes suggested here would not conform to the solution of a reduced cost of goods sold, for instance, right? If that's your company goal, this particular objective wouldn't conform with it. It's the wrong set of goals and objective measures. Effective quantifiable outcomes are measures of the solution that are tangible and specific, as I mentioned before. So are you looking for cost savings in should cost negotiations? Are you able to reduce the number of suppliers? Are you able to improve scrap and rework on first-time release to manufacturing? You wouldn't want to necessarily build a quoting solution if you're interested in design to cost. So it's important that you have all of these elements come together when you're building your blueprint, your success plan. And when effectively done together, you'll see all these elements that we described. So success plan, much like a building blueprint, defines your value measurements and your timeline for success. Your site selection, much like your company goals, dictate the scale of the solution. It sets the structure for you. Your company goals, your development objectives are really about the foundation. They set the scope and scale. And then your quantifiable outcomes, your measures for success, it's the structure. It conforms the solution. So taken all together, these are the basic elements that go into a success plan, your blueprint for product profitability. Now, David's going to take a few moments here and walk you through some of the key elements that go into a success plan.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so next, we're going to talk through, so far we know company goals, we know the deployment objectives, and we know the metrics. Now, where are you going to implement? So who here is not a customer so far? Can you raise your hands? Anyone not a customer so far? Got a few of you out there. So if you're not a customer so far, so to Kevin's point, how do you create scarcity in making sure that the deployment you're starting with has the right scarcity? Now, I'll give you a hint. If you put a survey out and you say, anyone want to join aPriori, we'll give you a $1,000 bonus, you'll most likely get a lot of applicants to join the aPriori deployment. Jokes aside, picking the right projects is really the critical point of where we start after understanding your company goals, your objectives, your metrics, and now where are you going to deploy? So one of the examples that Chris had on his slide was understanding if you're trying to reduce your goal is to reduce supplier costs. We understand that you're reducing supplier costs, your metrics may be a certain dollar value you're trying to achieve. One of the projects we may look at is supplier consolidation. So where does aPriori fit into the process of supplier consolidation and making sure you're successful in the projects that you've defined to meet your objectives, your metrics, and your business goals? So next we look at a global user onboarding strategy. Now I know not everyone here is global, but I put global because majority of our clients are moving towards a global deployment. They have different sites globally, and they're making sure aPriori is really defined in a process globally within the deployment. So there's a list of things that go with an onboarding strategy. We have aPriori Live classes, or a class you take when you first start. We have a certain number of videos that you would want to make sure your users are going to follow. We have understanding how you're going to use expert services, if you have expert services, which Mackenzie is here today. If you want to talk to her, she is the manager for expert services, someone to reach out to. And then also, support-wise, do you understand how to use our support site? Who's going to access it? What kind of system admins do you have? There's a lot of items we're going to work with you to create an onboarding strategy together. Now back to what Kevin was mentioning, really the challenge isn't that you've bought the software. I think the software is probably the easiest decision you're going to make. The challenge is that you don't want to shrink wrap the software, put it on a shelf, and then not take it off the shelf for the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years and not achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve. One of the critical pieces of that goal is understanding how do you build a support structure internally at your company. What kind of super users are you going to create? So I think of this as if you're implementing your CAD software the first time, there's a certain number of super users you've defined. So if I have a question as a design engineer, I know to go to Bob or Sally and understand that if I can't design something in a way that I think I need to design it, I can go to them for questions. Our goal within our deployment is to make sure that you're self-sustainable and you have those super users as well within your deployment. Now, in the same context, if you look at the CAD solution and understanding when it was first implemented at your company, my guess is, similar to what we saw earlier, there was a certain number of first movers, people were really excited about using the software, and there were a certain number of laggards, people who really are not excited about moving from 2D to 3D modeling. Now, the challenge I would give you is if you never integrated that 3D modeling best practice, for the reasons that I think everyone understands, your design engineers are going to be more efficient, you're going to end up being more proactive in your designs, iterative, and really you're saving money in the design process. That's why you're implementing CAD, right? It makes sense. Go to 3D modeling. I think the same thing happens when you're implementing a new should-cost software in your process. We want to make sure that we're integrating into the right business workflow. Both Halliburton and Flex mentioned this morning. They're integrating aPriori into a workflow that makes sense so when the user gets to their job, they know when and how to use aPriori. And then you can talk about the fact of, if I'm knowing how to use it, how do I make sure I want to use it? And that's the next step that we help you with throughout the process. The last piece is define technical solution. So I intentionally put this last. And the reason I put that is because really we want to understand your goals, your objectives, your measures, and then understand what projects we're going to be on before we really look at what technical solution are we going to give you to make you successful. Now, I put this in 3 different buckets. So the first bucket is installation, upgrades, understanding your IT requirements. And this afternoon, there's a really good session. So if you have a pen and you open up your pamphlet, there's a really good session on understanding how we do upgrades, what our cloud solution looks like, and the whole IT infrastructure this afternoon. Now, the second piece is understanding how we're going to technically configure your product. We've gotten really good at this. We've increased all of the different parameters within our product to make it so out of the box you can use it right away. And then we're going to configure the product with you to make sure you're successful in your use case. The third piece, I think, is most critical to your deployment. You can cost as many parts as you want, but really how you use the data is going to be the most critical piece to your deployment. Let me repeat that. So you can cost 1 million parts, and if you don't know how to use the data coming out of aPriori, then you're not going to hit your metrics, your objectives, and then your deployment goals. That's the critical part. And if you notice, throughout all the sessions we have today and tomorrow, we're focusing more on how you're using the data than showing you how to configure the product, because that's where you're going to find the most value with aPriori. It's how do you make sure your users are costing, and then you're using metrics to drive the right decisions in your business. So next, I'm going to pass off to Chris. He's going to talk about QBRs, or quarterly business reviews.
Thanks, David. So David was partially right. Technical was the next to last piece of the success plan, right? So wrapping it all together is the quarterly business review. So quarterly business reviews to us are an important aspect of how we make sure that the program, that the projects are staying on track. It's an opportunity for us to review those company goals again, the deployment objectives. Have we deployed to the right people? Have you gotten the success that you were expecting? Have you gotten that first value? Have you gotten to that expanded value? Are you yet seeing the sustained value? We try to use these as opportunities to meet with your management team and you to best understand if the success plan is on track and how to steer it back on a track if it's not. Now, we'd love to do these quarterly with you, but we recognize that sometimes that doesn't make sense. So at least we'd like to be able to do these with you semi-annually. And like I said, it's a chance for us to check in to make sure that we're going in the right direction. Now, there's one thing I want to go back on and mention just briefly. We talked about quantifiable outcomes. And I know sometimes it's hard for our customers to share some of the very specific measures necessary in order to prove your ROI and justify your purchase. Those aren't some things that you maybe are comfortable sharing with us in these reviews. The key for us is to have some type of measure that we can use, a proxy measure that tells us if we're going on the right path, if we're making it to the success that we're expecting. So while values and objectives are really important and something that you should measure, we know that sometimes they don't exactly end up in the success plan the same way. But we do want to make sure we have those proxies in place that we're reviewing as well. So at this time, I'd actually like to ask our success managers to join David and I on the stage. As we had mentioned before, the success managers are your guides, your customer advocates. They speak for you when you have challenges. They take it back to the executive team at aPriori. Now, your customer success managers are hopefully well known to you by now. And we've got all of them on stage with us. But if you don't know your customer success manager, obviously come and see me, and we'll make sure that you have one afterwards. Thank you very much for your time today.